G'day and welcome to another episode of Church and State with Dave Pellowe. Today I'm sitting down with Graeme Haycroft. Thank you very much for joining me, Graeme.
It's a pleasure, David.
Now, Graeme has been a successful businessman, sometimes employing up to over 2,000 people each and every week. How big is a payroll when you're paying that each week out of your pocket?
About 2 million, 1.5 to 2 million a week.
Wow.
Out of my back pocket.
Okay.
Ouch, but it all came back in, fortunately. There's a happy ending.
Yeah, that is, well, you hope so when you're investing that kind of money every week. Now, what I really wanted to get to know you about and introduce you to the audience was because of your involvement in unions, or rather in involvement in the solution to the extremes that unions have often presented. Now, I think unions have played an important role in our society. There have been injustices that have been righted with their intervention, and they're very useful when members of unions get into trouble, to have something bigger behind them to back them up with the experience and the knowledge to navigate legal difficulties, professional liability challenges, etc. And of course, achieving a fair outcome is an Australian value. But it's no surprise that many people around the world, and in Australia in particular, think that unions have excesses and then can become thugs in their own rights, dictating injustices instead of solving them.
Correct.
So,
why is it so?
Yeah, well, anywhere there's people involved, there's going to be problems. There's no such thing as a perfect organisation, and that's probably a good assumption to start with. You know, no matter what kind of organisation we think is awesome, if there's people involved, it's going to get worse over time, unless there are some checks and balances introduced.
Right. There's nothing wrong with association. I'm a great fan of it. I mean, I'm a member of associations, and I think employees in particular, it's a wonderful thing for them to associate to further their own ends. The problem is, it's not association, the problem is monopoly. And all of the egregious behaviour of the unions that you just mentioned are all a function of monopoly, not association. So, yes, we've got a union movement in this country which has a bad name, but it has a bad name not because it's the unions of employees, so to speak. It has a bad name because each little area has its own monopoly, and the whole idea of a monopoly is to extract a monopoly rent. And if you've got no competition, well, you have the right to charge more and basically do what you bloody like. So
the way an average viewer could probably agree with you if we give them a parallel that's not industrial is commercial. If Coles disappeared and Aldi disappeared and your local IGA disappeared, and all of a sudden the only shop that was available was Woolworths, you'd have to predict that the prices would go up in Woolworths and the service would go down.
That's a good example. Let's say you've got a town, let's say a town anywhere, let's say Maroochydore. I live at Mooloolaba. And the rule says that can only be Woolworths in that town. And the rules say that no other store can start up in that town unless Woolworths agree. Mm-hmm. Do you think they'd agree? No, they won't.
No, of course not.
So, okay, so there are no competitors. So Woolworths are then going to charge whatever they like. And the problem isn't...
And justify it.
Oh, yeah.
They'll have good reasons.
And one of their mechanisms...
But they can get away with it.
One of their mechanisms, of course, is to get the government to help them make sure that what they're charging is correct.
Yeah.
So the problem, again, is monopoly. And the unions, if you like, have a monopoly for each little area or area of expertise. So you have the coverage rights. You know, there's a special union for transport drivers, another union for shearers and, general farm workers. There's another union for clerks and so on and so forth,
Yep.
And each little area has a monopoly. And even if you look at the Coles Woolworth example and you've got the SDA,
yep.
the Shoppies Union.
Shop Distributive Alliance.
Yeah.
Yep.
They have the sole right to represent retail workers, in Australia and Brisbane, but not North. the AWU takes over and has the coverage rights for North Queensland. So the arrangements with Coles and Woolworths workers and some of the other lesser chains, which are coming to the same group, is all handled by the AWU. So it's just, they're monopolies. And
so you're not anti-union.
Absolutely not.
You're anti-monopoly.
Correct.
Because a free market is better for the consumer. Is that right?
Well, if you look at we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the nurses' union, the alternate nurses' union we've started, it's a direct competitor with existing QNU, except because we don't do any other political stuff, we only charge what is necessary to provide the service, which is about half.
Let's talk about the nurses' union in a minute. I actually want to give the viewer more background.
Okay.
So how did you first get interested in the monopoly of unions and trying to solve it? What was the first problem you came across?
Well, I was involved I used to be in the insurance and superannuation business, and way back in 1989, the National Party committee that I was on were talking about the arrangement for making enterprise bargaining agreements, or collective agreements as they were known. Mm-hmm. And there was a proposition put forward by the committee. It was an area I didn't really know very much about, that we should remove the third party and just have the employees deal with the employers. And I thought, that's pretty sensible. And I said, well, I'd be interested in doing that because I had a lot of superannuation funds. And I said, would we be able to sort of nominate our own superannuation funds, because the union superannuation industry fund model was just starting. Mm-hmm. And I could see that was going to impact pretty severely on anyone who was in the superannuation business. So it sort of came in just by accident. And then in doing that work under the Bjelke-Petersen government rules, there were about 81 of these collective agreements lodged. They're called voluntary employment agreements in those days. I'd actually lodged 37 of them. Mm-hmm. So I did just about half of all those that were lodged, because I'd figured out a way to do it, learned what you could and couldn't change. And I found it quite easy to make really quite dramatic changes to workplace situations. Mm-hmm. And through the simple mechanism of going to the places and talking to the people and getting them to agree. So that's how I sort of got into, doing this industrial relations caper.
Yep.
And I had no skill or qualifications at it at all, which turned out to be a huge advantage.
And how did you get roped into the shearers union?
Well, the shearers thing came, will I hold this up?
Yeah.
I wrote a paper for the H.O. Nichols Society back in 1993 or something, where I'd been contacted by a bloke named Barry Hammonds and his wife, who was a shearing contractor, and they were having trouble with the AWU. And the thought occurred to me, since I just discovered a mob in Victoria called Troubleshooters Available, who had sort of copied an English idea of having contractors, self-employed contractors, as agency people as opposed to employees. And I thought that was an interesting mechanism which could be used to make workplaces more efficient. And it translated, as it turned out, very, very successfully into the shearing game. And we didn't do much other than provide staff. And what we changed, as I remember, was the shed hands. The shearers, just for a bit of background for your listeners, for your viewers, shearers get paid on a piece rate. They get so much per sheep to shear. But the shed hands and all the other people in the classes all get paid by the hour. Mm-hmm. So you had half the shed with a vested interest in slowing the whole thing down, mm-hmm. and the other half vested interest of speeding it up. Mm-hmm. So by the simple expedient, because we weren't bound by any awards, we changed all the shed hand and classes categories and made them get paid the same way as the shearers, so much a sheep.
Yep.
So they all got more money. And the whole culture and dynamic of the shearing shed changed. Wow. Where everybody, no one had ever heard of shed hands going to grab bloody sheep before and put them in the hands of the shearers so they get shearing. It used to be the other way around. But when there was a quid in it for them, that's what they did.
It's human
nature.
I
learned about culture and how important culture is in a workplace, and how little things can change it quite dramatically.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Well,
that's how it's hearing. Do you want to go on the next thing?
Well, let's
ask questions.
Let's talk about the builders in building industry reforms in the next segment, because you managed to really break a stranglehold monopoly in the building industry, which is very interesting. But we'll talk about that in our next segment.
Okay.
Thanks for watching. If you really enjoyed that video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Have a look at this great video next, and check out the website for even more interesting articles and episodes later.